Question: where was the entrance wound? Dr. Perry: there was an entrance wound in the neck. Next question: which way was the bullet coming on the neck wound? At him? Dr. Perry: it appeared to be coming at him. The reporters kept firing questions. One asked, can't we clear this up just a little bit more? In your estimation, was there 1 or 2 shots? Just give us something. Dr. Perry said he couldn't tell. The head and neck wounds might be separate, or they might be caused by one bullet. A reporter asked, Doctor, describe the entrance wound. You think from the front, in the throat? Replied Perry, the wound appeared to be an entrance wound in the front of the throat. Yes, that is correct. Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess, Connell, and if you're new, then welcome. I would love to earn your subscription today. Well, today we are in part 16, maybe? I'm losing track of our walkthrough of the JFK assassination through excellent literature. And there are 2 reasons for this. One is that it is excellent for all of us to get acquainted with a variety of literature and not just kind of pigeonhole ourselves into one particular view. But the other and more pressing reason for it is that people like Rick and Kathy and Mary Helen and now Anne have been generous with literature. And the generosity that I have received this last week, you guys, I can't even believe it. She wrote me I think a week ago right now, and within a couple of days I was holding them in my hand. You guys, she gave me her first edition 1964 copy of the Warren Commission volumes, all 26 of them. These have all of the evidence, all of the various exhibits and testimonies. As I flip through right now, I'm just seeing different people's testimonies, Curry and evidence files. This particular volume was the first one that I picked up. It's volume 21 because, do you see the first name there? Paine to Yarborough. Ruth Paine is, for me, I think the most fascinating figure in the entire case. And so I just wanted to look at what evidence was associated with her. Soon I'll be going through and reading her testimonies. But I've already discovered one thing that as I was just reading, I was struck with a question and I reached out and sure enough, somebody else confirmed, yeah, that is what it looks like it's saying. So I'm sure as we go through, there's going to be things where I don't think I'm going to reinvent the wheel like Sylvia Marr and others have gone through with a fine-tooth comb, and they probably have discovered all of these things. And yet, I think throughout this series, we have already noticed that there are many facts that researchers have known and maybe were put into a book in 1991, but especially those things pre-internet weren't always brought to the forefront and definitely aren't in the mainstream understanding of the case. So I just want to celebrate with you guys. I want to thank Anne for this excessive generosity that just feels so precious to me. I have felt with other pieces of literature, and now certainly with this whole set, I feel a stewardship that is significant and that definitely tethers me to the case and to the research. So I'm exceedingly grateful and excited to go through these. So obviously that relates to all the books that I've been given, and until that gift, this book that we're going to talk about today was the absolute most expensive book that I would not have been able to own were it not for Rick's gift. He sent me 3 boxes full of his JFK research, books that he had collected over many decades, and this one is the most hard to get, at least from my perspective, financially. And it's a thick one. David Lifton's book. I remember in one documentary, somebody said that after this book came out, she said, we were all known as the best evidence babies, meaning that they were the ones who entered the case and entered the study of it because of this book. So for many researchers and many Americans, this is the pivotal work that kind of brought them into the case. It's called Best Evidence, Disguise, and Deception in the Assassination of John F. Kennedy. And it was published in 1980. So that is the book we're going to be reading today. One of the things that I try to do when I'm looking through the books and choosing which sections we are going to read is my first goal is to further our storyline. And so we have gone from some of the beginning ideas, even like JFK's ideas for nuclear disarmament and things like that. Where were Jack and Jack in their marriage? Who was Lee Oswald? Did he go to Mexico City? We're trying to go in a linear fashion through the story. And last episode was when we went through the assassination, the actual moment by moment. And we read through Mark North's book, which was, for me, fascinating. I really enjoyed his telling. It took me a minute to get into it, but once I was there, because he combines so many sources and because nearly every sentence is a quote from some other book, I found it really entertaining, but also engrossing to see this is what's going on in DC. This is what's going on in Dallas. This person at Dallas PD is doing this. Jack Ruby is over here doing this. He was telling us more like a 30,000 foot perspective of here's everything going on possible. And I really liked that. So that's what we had for that one. For this one, we are going to be talking about two things. One is what's called the head snap. So we're going to read a section called the head snap, and then we're going to read about the throat wound. Was it an entrance or an exit? Now, one of the things that, his work is titled Best Evidence. One of the things that he did in this book was to just bring the evidence to the American people and give us a chance to sort through it. These are two examples: the head snap, what's going on with that, and then the throat wound, what's going on with that. Is it an entrance wound or an exit wound? So he's looking at the evidence. The other final thing that I want you to know about this book is that actually the thing that this book is known for is a hypothesis that there may have been a surgery that was performed between when the Dallas doctors saw the body and when the autopsy was done, and that was hidden from the American people. So that, I'm just giving you all that. If you aren't familiar with this work, I think that is the unique framework that was brought through this book. But there are many other things. He goes through the evidence. It's fascinating. It's thick. And I see tons of endnotes and footnotes. And so clearly researched, clearly lots to dig into and chew on here. But we are going to dive right into chapter 2, Allen Dulles and the head snap. In December 1965, Allen Dulles, former head of the CIA and a Warren commissioner, visited UCLA as a Regents scholar. He was paid a princely sum for giving a few speeches and meeting students informally in a coffee klatch atmosphere. This permitted us to rub elbows with someone from the real world. Dulles's background was markedly different from that of his fellow commissioners. Espionage was his major career. He also differed from his Warren commissioners' peers in that he had no job. All the rest of them had a job going. So he became the de facto head of the committee because he was always present. He was the most present committee member in their listenings and goings on. So we get a little bit about his espionage career. After wartime service with OSS, Dulles was Director of Central Intelligence from 1953 to 1961, through the Eisenhower years, and almost to the end of Kennedy's first year in office. His last major project as CIA chief was the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. Kennedy replaced him in December 1961, 8 months later. Dulles' first return to public service was his appointment to the Warren Commission by Lyndon Johnson. So that would be 2 years later. I called Dulles' student host, so there at UCLA, and asked for a private 15-minute interview, thinking that Dulles perhaps wasn't aware of the grassy knoll evidence or the head snap. Oh, this is fascinating. So this is someone talking with Dulles. Let's see what happens. I also wanted to show him the Mormon blow-ups. Oh my goodness, you guys. Okay, I have to give you a preview. So a few weeks ago, the Grodins called me up and said, hey, how would you like to go meet Marianne Moorman? And I still geek out and get excited from the minute they mention ideas like this. But I was like, of course I want to meet her. And so we ended up getting to go out to do that. I'll have a video of that coming up. But I just wanted to show you guys, if you don't know, this is Marianne Moorman. And yes, I got to meet her and she signed 2 photos for me, actually. So this one is Marianne Moorman and Jean Hill, who we read about. But I got to meet her about just a few weeks ago. Such a gift. And then I have this blow up that Robert made for me. And then Marianne signed it for me. But this is the blow up that he is referencing. I actually had somebody on a recent video ask me, Jess, where is he pointing? What is being pointed at when he says there is the shooter? So let's just look together really fast. If you are looking at this right here, it is fuzzy. So if you're confused, do not feel bad. It is something where you just have to look at the photo and think about the size of things. One of the things that can give you a size reference is that this is Abraham Zapruder. So that's how big a man's body is that far away. Here is a man's body here. And so we have those reference points. But right back here, there's the tree line, the tree line, the tree line. But then in this little fat spot right here, there are light and dark features that could be, and I think I do believe, and Robert believes, that that is a person firing. And I'll tell you what is being seen. So there are light and dark features both in that one spot. It is not solid, and it does not appear the same as the trees. If you look at the tree leaves, they are solid black with a little bit of like gray at the edge. But this particular has dark and light mixed into that one spot. And it's about the width and size of what you would expect from a head and a rifle that's like literally pointing almost exactly at the camera, because you can see what the angle would be. It'd be only slightly askew. So this is the classic Marianne Moorman photo that was taken at the moment of the assassination. It was taken on a Polaroid. It was developed that day, and it has been studied for 62 years, and now I have a signed copy of it, which is just tremendous. But this is the Mormon blow-up that Lifton is talking about. I'm just going to put it right back here for us. Okay, so that way you have it there over my shoulder just to peek out through the rest of this video. But that is the photo that's being discussed. I thought maybe he wasn't, aware of the head snap, and I wanted to make him and show him the Mormon blow-ups. I told the student organizer that I wished to meet privately with Dulles and explained why. The request was relayed to Mr. Dulles, who objected. Mr. Dulles said, if you have information like that, you should take it to the FBI. Mr. Dulles would gladly speak with me in front of the other students, but he would not meet with me alone. Quote, he thinks that is protection for himself, because otherwise you could go out afterward and claim you had a personal interview with him and misquote him. The student said that the previous night, a student in the audience, quote, had that Fox book. And this is apparently referring to someone named Sylvan Fox. And he really badgered Dulles. Please don't badger him. They were really laughing at this fellow last night. You can come if you want to, but I'm sure they'll laugh at you too. I thought the host relished the idea of seeing mincemeat made of another heckler. The meeting took place on December 7th, 1965 in the Sierra Lounge of Hedrick Hall, one of the UCLA dormitories. Word had spread that someone was going to question Dulles about the Kennedy assassination, and about 50 students showed up. I came decorously dressed in a suit and brought along 2 of the 26 volumes and photographs I thought would be useful. After a brief delay, Dulles walked in with Mrs. Dulles and the student moderator. He sat down, lit his pipe, and made a few witty remarks. It's funny, this is an old habit, centuries old, but for a man to come in with a pipe, this was very common for Allen Dulles, and it's just an interesting practice that you would do in just a random moment like this. People don't do this anymore. They don't pull out their vape or their cigarettes in the middle of an interview. I can't think of a time when that's happened. So that's just an interesting practice. I guess Bill Maher does, but not normal people. His eyes settled on me several times and on my 2 large blue-bound Warren Commission volumes. It was clear that we would be adversaries. I was recognized by the moderator, and there followed the uncomfortable but mandatory introductory remarks necessary in 1965 to explain how I had all the detailed information I'd be referring to. One of the things that's interesting about Allen Dulles and someone owning the 26 volumes on the other side being opponents is that they had, I don't know if everybody knows this, so I'm just going to explain it. There was the Warren Commission report that was released 10 months following, I believe, the Kennedy assassination. But all 26 volumes were not released at that point. And when one of the commission members asked Allen Dulles about, wasn't he concerned about all the evidence coming out? And his basic response was, the American people won't read it. A few dusty professors across the country will read those 26 volumes, but most people aren't going to read it. I don't think we have to worry about that, essentially. So to me, his listing of Dulles on one side and the student with 2 volumes of the Warren Commission volumes on the other side is just an interesting contrast, because Allen Dulles himself kind of downplayed the significance of anybody even having those volumes, that nobody would basically read them. So here he's eyeing those volumes and seeing someone who is reading or has read at least part of the 26 volumes. I was, quote, one of those who owned the 26 volumes, I said, explaining what they were. And Dulles chimed in, I own a set, so you must include me too. The students laughed, and that broke the ice a bit. I wanted to ask just one question, I said, and get your comments on it. One of the most important conclusions of the commission, I began, was that there was no evidence of conspiracy. Wasn't it? Said Dulles, correcting me and punctuating the air with his finger as he spoke. We have found no evidence of conspiracy. That's an interesting contrast to draw. I proceeded to describe the motion of the president's head on the Zapruder film and some of the grassy knoll testimony. How could the commission's report make a statement like that in view of all that evidence? Dulles responded, we examined the film 1,000 times, and he proceeded to deny that the motion I described appeared on the film. As he answered, I retrieved from my briefcase a demonstration panel prepared by Ray Marcus, in which the relevant portions of all frames between 313 and 323, these are Zapruder film frame numbers, those frames were all arranged in sequence on one 8.5 by 11 inch page. So not large. There's 10 or 11 frames that would have been, this big on a sheet of paper. The backward motion was obvious. See photo 2. Okay, so we'll look real quick. Here is photo 2. So he's showing this 3-panel movement. Head forward, flash, and then the head back. So he says the motion was obvious. I walked over to Dulles and put out one of the panels on his lap. Here, I said, kneeling beside him. I know these are not the best reproductions, but just look at the president's head. and the rear seat of the car and see if they get closer together or farther apart in successive frames after impact. It's like a question, if I asked my 7-year-old that question, it'd be like, yeah, obviously his head goes closer to the back of the car. You don't have to be a neurosurgeon or a rocket scientist to understand the movement of the head and the physics behind it. Now, what are you saying? Just what are you saying? Said Dulles, his voice rising. I'm saying there must be someone up front firing at Kennedy, and that means a conspiracy, I replied. Look, he said, there isn't a single iota of evidence indicating a conspiracy. No one says there was anything like that. As politely as possible, I described the statistics in Harold Feldman's 52 Witnesses, The Grassy Knoll, closing with the fact that several people on the overpass, those are all the railroad workers that we've talked about. I'd like to go through their testimony at some point because it's very clear. But if you haven't watched them, go ahead and go look for them. Helmer Reedberg, I think, is the site where you find most of those, and you can do a search for railroad workers or the name Sam Holland and find some of those. But closing with the fact that several people on the overpass saw smoke coming from the area behind the fence and that a policeman, quote, even smelled smoke there, end quote. Look, he paused, and then his voice rising again angrily. What are you talking about? Who saw smoke? He thundered, sounding as though I had fabricated the information out of whole cloth. Sam Holland, for instance, I replied. He was standing on the overpass. I named a few others and said that anyone could buy the book 4 days, turn to page 21, and see in color what was apparently a puff of smoke on the Nix film frame published there. By now, Dulles had worked himself into a lather. Now, what are you saying? He roared. That someone was smoking up there? His attempt at ridicule was unmistakable. Are you telling me, he continued, that there was no one up in that building? That no gun was found there? That no shells were found there? I mean, so this is obfuscation. This is the making of a straw man. According to this account, Lifton has said nothing about the building. He's not talking about the building. And he's actually inferred that there may have been someone there because he's talking about conspiracy, but he's talking about the person on this side, the person who would have been behind the fence that we just talked about. So he's saying there might have been someone here. And what Dulles is saying is, look. No, we found no conspiracy of evidence. No one says anything like that. And then when he brings evidence and talks about multiple people seeing smoke and a photo showing smoke, he says, now what are you saying? That somebody was smoking there? And are you saying there was no one up in so he's changing. It's like a magician that says, look over here. This is the thing you really want to look at over here, not that thing back behind the grassy knoll. Look over here at the building and tell me that's not true. And this wasn't the topic. This wasn't the focus. And Lifton hadn't brought it up. Dulles is the one trying to shift the focus. Oh, no, sir, I said, feigning surprise. I'm sure there was a gun there. I'm sure there were shells there. I think someone was shooting from there. There's a end note. He says, I wasn't really sure about that, but I didn't want to complicate our discussion with another issue. But I think someone was also shooting from up front. Harold Feldman analyzed all that testimony and quotes witnesses who even heard shots from 2 locations. Just who, asked Dulles in an extremely sarcastic tone, is Harold Feldman? Okay, so this is actually an appeal to, what's it called? Credentials, I think. Basically, this is a logical fallacy that we should only listen to someone if they have a PhD. We can't listen to anybody else. Like, who is this person that's even making this claim? It's like, well, let's deal with the evidence. Let's deal with what's being said. Let's deal with the logic and evidence of what's here. But the attack being made isn't against the evidence or the case or the information. The thing is, well, who is that exactly? What's going on with that guy? Like, it's attempting to discredit the valid evidence and logic being put forward because it's like, we don't even know who Harold Feldman is. I mean, do you realize I was the director of the CIA? Hello? Like, Who are you? You know, who is this guy? What's going on? So he's trying to discredit him. While I was certain Dulles knew who Feldman was, I answered by describing him as a writer, sir, a freelance writer. And who does he write for? Inquired Dulles. He frequently writes for the Nation. Dulles raised his right hand, slapped his knee with a savage intensity, and laughed loudly and derisively. The Nation! There was an embarrassing silence. No one laughed with him. Politely, I interjected, I don't think that is so funny, sir. I don't care what magazine the article was printed in, either the right or the left. The article is well written, and it is accurately footnoted. You say the Nation is accurately footnoted, eh? Replied Dulles. He's so dismissive, as if I didn't already have reasons not to like Dulles. But to hear his back and forth is really quite telling about the man. His logic is lacking. I mean, he's obviously using fallacies to try to tear down this guy's arguments, but he's also dismissive and rude. And I just want you to think back to the kinds of people that you encountered when you were around this age. When you were 18, 19, 20, 21, you were college age, whether or not you went to college. I want you to think about the ways that people can treat you, whether they mock you and treat you like whatever you're saying is full of beans and you're dumb. Sometimes what we say when we were 18, 19, 20, 21 is full of beans. I remember I went on a trip. We got to go visit Washington, D.C., and I do not remember what I asked him, but I got to meet Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. And I think I asked something. I was trying to formulate a question that would be even worth discussing. And I think I asked him, like, you know, what kind of issues make a case difficult for you to decide ethically? I didn't even, you guys, I don't remember what he answered. I was so nervous. And what I asked didn't have some sort of deep bearing in the facts because I was so young. I didn't even understand fully his role in the Supreme Court. I didn't know, you know, you're just young and you often lack. Now he didn't lack. He was sitting there with the 26 volumes. But my point is the way that Clarence Thomas treated me was with respect. He answered my question, and he did with the other students in the seminar as well. He was polite, he was kind, he answered our questions, he was gracious. And so I have a good impression of him as a public figure, that he interacted with us with patience and kindness despite our lack of deep familiarity with his work. But then I want you to think about someone that you've met that treated you this way, dismissive, rude, or if you haven't had somebody treat you like that, imagine someone interacting with you in this way. A public figure that you were excited to speak with, that you had questions for, maybe difficult questions, but the way that he's treating him tells us something about him. This isn't someone who, again, let's imagine that you are Alan Dulles and you have a great confidence that you guys did a bang up job, that the investigation was excellent, that you did a full job. Even still, wouldn't you have the respect for a young person to say, wow, you've really looked into this. This is impressive. Well, I'm glad you're coming with this question. This is great. And then proceed to answer. Like, if you have good answers, bring them. Tell us what evidence convinced you. Tell us, well, you're right. There is the impression of smoke. But if you look, you know, these other photos taken on these days show that at 12:35 in the afternoon every day, there is an appearance of smoke in that location. Like, if that's what's true, just tell us. And then we move on. But I feel like a respectful person would go, wow, this is a young person with some enterprising skills. This is somebody with curiosity and with a rare capacity to enter into deep research at this age. Like, I'm just going to honor it and going to answer his questions. But that's not how Alan Dulles responds. Instead, he is using bad logic all over the place. He is mocking the author. He's mocking this questioner. And no one's laughing with him. No one's laughing. Dulles now turned to the group and said, I don't know if you're really all interested in this, and if you're not, well, we'd just as well. His voice trailed off as he was met by anxious murmurs. Oh no, we're interested. No, keep going, etc. So he shrugged and we continued sparring. Dulles looked down at the photographs on his lap and claimed he couldn't see what was there. Look, there isn't one iota of evidence that the shots came from the front. How can you say such a thing? Mr. Dulles, I said, I'm showing you this evidence, and I've told you about the eyewitness testimony, which was taken under oath and certainly qualifies as evidence. And I'm absolutely amazed to hear you deny the existence of all this. Dulles got very angry. You have nothing. Absolutely nothing. The head could be going around in circles for all I can see. You can't see a thing here. I have examined the film in the archives many times. This proves nothing. The exchange ended with my passing about 40 copies of the photo exhibits around the room and asking the students to see for themselves the movement of the head. Meanwhile, Dulles, waving his hand vehemently, simply denied that the head went back at all. I can't see a blasted thing here. You can't say the head goes back. I can't see it going back. It does not go back. You can't say that. You haven't shown it. At some point during the conversation, Dulles looked at me and said, you know, I've never heard that argument before, and I've read all those books the experts are supposedly writing. He said it in a very funny way. To the students, I'm sure it sounded as though the argument must be no good because it hadn't been published, but it had the two-edged tone of a disgruntled compliment reluctantly paid. Like, I haven't heard that argument, and I've read all the books, and you've come up with an argument that no one else has made, like a compliment toward him. When the next student, recognized from the floor, asked another question about the Warren Commission, there was a whispered conference between Dulles and the moderator. Dulles said that if there were no further questions on the subject, he would prefer to go to bed. He said he had had enough of this work when he was on the commission, that the commission had settled all those questions 1,000 times over. So interesting. I mean, why would you go to the hotbed of learning and activity and think that these young college kids who are up for anything, like, why wouldn't you expect to talk about that particular thing? And I think the answer is he probably did, but he probably expected to speak to a captive audience, to people who would just kind of like nod along and be like, oh, great one. Oh, Mr. CIA man, let's listen to you. Oh, you were there. You saw all the evidence. You know what you're doing. So we don't even have to ask any questions. I think that's what he thought he was going to get. And what he came instead was not a dusty old professor, but a young enterprising college student who happened to own all 26 volumes and who had read at least parts of them and who had photographs and who had the panels and was leaning in with questions. And he did not like that. He didn't appreciate it at all. So that's the head snap. When people talk about the head snap. Now, we're going to get into it more actually in our next episode, so be sure to come back for that. We're going to be going through Robert Groden's book, Absolute Proof. We're going to go through a selection of that talks about the head wounds and the bullets. But this was a quick look at the head snap. What is going on? And this wasn't the first discussion of it, obviously, because the 1975 showing of the film was really the first time the American people saw for themselves the head going back instead of forward, as has been described by Dan Rather. If you remember, Dan Rather famously described the head as going violently forward in the video. He was given a chance to see it on the day of or the day after the assassination. And so he watched the film and then came back to the cameras and immediately described the film as showing the head of the president going violently forward instead of the exact opposite way of that. Very difficult to understand how Mr. Rather got to that conclusion. But now, this would have been, so this is published in 1980, so we're talking about maybe the late 70s. By this point, it started to get into the bloodstream of the American people that actually the president's head went backwards. And so let's talk about that. And he tried to get Dulles to do that to basically no avail. The next thing we're going to talk about is chapter 3, the throat wound, entrance or exit. Now, if you watched our recent walkthrough of the Lee Harvey Oswald boarding house, then you saw a part of that video where Miss Pat asked, she said, this was an exit wound, right? And right then, of course, Robert and Janet and I explained to her that all the doctors explained that this was an entrance wound and that whole perspective was kind of shut down from the beginning. But now we're going to go ahead and from best evidence, we're going to hear what he says about the throat wound, entrance or exit. On the afternoon of November 22nd, 1963, millions of Americans heard radio and TV networks report that Dr. Malcolm Perry, a Dallas physician who was with the president in the emergency room when he died, said there was a bullet entrance wound situated on the front of Kennedy's neck. Yes, from the first hearing, that's how that wound was described. I wasn't one of those Americans. I was asleep at the time of the assassination, and when awakened by my clock radio about 2 hours afterwards, initially thought the incessant talk about assassination must refer to the Lincoln assassination. Within minutes of learning otherwise, I jumped to another false conclusion. Only a lunatic would murder a president. Then, like millions of others, I sat back and waited for the authorities to produce the name of the lunatic. It never occurred to me to doubt the official pronouncements, to analyze the news reports, or keep track of the statements of the various officials. I never noticed that what the Dallas doctors were saying about the throat wound, that the shot struck from the front, was inconsistent with what the Dallas Police Department was saying about the location of the assassin, who allegedly fired from a building behind the motorcade. I first became aware of that conflict when I attended Mark Lang's lecture in New York City. Wow. For me, this is like getting to go to a Beatles concert. I mean, I love a good concert, but I would much rather hear an excellent debate. Me personally, that's just, and I love music, actually. Something y'all probably do not know is that I started out as a music major in college. So I genuinely love music. I played percussion all through high school. I was on the drum line, and then I was a vocal performance major for the first semester until I realized that what I loved was getting to sing and use my voice. What I did not love was musical notation and, music theory. I just had no interest in that, so I switched very quickly. But I do love music, but I would love to attend this debate. I think a lecture or debate like this would be infinitely more valuable to me. Well, he got to attend. In 1966, I wanted every scrap of information about this issue. I found the throat wound interesting on several levels. It was, of course, important that the first doctors to see the president thought he was struck from the front. But the issue was important for other reasons as well. The more I probed, the more I learned about pressures apparently put upon Dallas doctors to change their story, the shadowy role played by the Secret Service, the behavior of the news media, and the unusual way in which the Warren Commission handled all this. The source of the November 22nd reports describing the throat wound as an entrance was a hospital news conference conducted after President Kennedy's body was removed. In addition to Dr. Perry, neurosurgeon Kemp Clark, who pronounced Kennedy dead, also participated. So 2 physicians were there, Dr. Perry, neurosurgeon Kemp Clark, both of them present at the time of death. At the time of the Warren Commission's investigation, exactly what Dr. Perry said that day in Dallas was a matter of some dispute. Yet it was then, and remains today, a matter of considerable legal and historical interest. When Dr. Perry entered the emergency room at Parkland Memorial Hospital and took charge of the effort to save President Kennedy, he decided that a tracheotomy, an operation in which an artificial airway is provided by cutting into the throat and inserting a tube directly into the windpipe, was in order. By sheer coincidence, the throat wound was at a location suitable for this surgical procedure. Consequently, Dr. Perry made his incision directly through the bullet wound, thus altering its appearance. So let's talk about that really fast, just for the sake of this conversation that we're having. The first shot is this entrance wound. It is the one that we see him go up like this. I'll note he does not grab or go like this, which is our initial thought, is that, he's grabbing for Paine, but he didn't. He went up like this. Now, some people think he was going to block his face. Whatever the case, his arms come up like this. And that is the entrance wound. The other thing I think that's important to know is that I looked it up at one point, and there were about 1,000 people coming through the Parkland ER every year for gunshot wounds. And so that means they saw an average of roughly 3 bullet wounds a day. So these were not bougie doctors in some small clinic who saw an odd bullet wound. We're talking about Texas, and we're talking about a relatively poor public hospital where they were seeing 3 bullet wounds a day. They know what an entrance wound is. They know what an exit wound looks like. These doctors are not speaking off the cuff. They're not making a, snap judgment. They're not making an assumption. This is what they do day in, day out. Consequently, the only people who saw the actual bullet wound were the doctors and others in Dallas who viewed the body before Dr. Perry made his incision. Obviously, no one had a better opportunity to observe that wound than Dr. Perry himself, and no description of that wound was based on more immediate or direct observation than the comments Dr. Perry made at that first meeting with the press. Here is the exact quote. At 3:10 Central Standard Time, UPI carried a brief report of that news conference and quoted him directly. Here's the quote. Dr. Malcolm Perry, 34, said, quote, "There was an entrance wound below the Adam's apple." So here, a low throat wound. Veteran New York Times reporter Tom Wicker, with the White House press in Dallas, rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital and attended the doctor's press conference. In the next day's New York Times, he reported, Dr. Malcolm Perry, an attending surgeon, and Dr. Kemp Clark, chief of neurosurgery at Parkland Hospital, gave more details. Mr. Kennedy was hit by a bullet in the throat, just below the Adam's apple, they said. This wound had the appearance of a bullet's entry. The Warren Commission had this to say about Dr. Perry, quote, "Considerable confusion has arisen because of the comments attributed to Dr. Perry concerning the nature of the neck wound. Immediately after the assassination, many people reached the erroneous conclusion about the source of the shots because of Dr. Perry's observations to the press." So they're saying it was erroneous. There was, these comments were just attributed to Dr. Perry. So that's attempting to put some distance. Like, there were comments that were attributed to this person. There was some error here. This was an understatement. Dr. Perry's words, simultaneously transmitted to every subscriber of UPI's primary A-wire, were reported by radio, TV, and newspapers and reached an immense audience. In effect, Dr. Perry walked out of the Parkland Memorial Hospital emergency room and delivered his initial medical opinion to the entire world. When I first began studying the assassination in 1965, I soon realized that the dispute over Dr. Perry's remarks combined 2 separate issues. First, what did he say? Second, was he right? A tape recording or a transcript could answer the first question, but not the second. That was a medical question. Okay, so there's 2 questions. What did he actually say? And was what he said a correct medical opinion? By the spring of 1966, when I was drafting the case for 3 assassins, I had come to disagree with the Warren Report's conclusions in both these areas. I believed neither that Dr. Perry was misquoted, nor that he was mistaken. Furthermore, my study of the 26 volumes, supplemented by microfilmed records of a number of newspapers, reinforced my suspicions about the way the commission handled this matter. For Dr. Perry to have been misquoted, all the reporters and news organizations present at his original news conference had to make the same error. The Warren Commission implied that the media had transformed Perry's answer to a hypothetical question about what could have happened into a professional opinion about what did happen. Yet AP, UPI, the New York Times, to name but 3, all reported Dr. Perry's unqualified opinion that the throat wound was an entrance wound. Furthermore, in subsequent interviews, Dr. Perry continued to describe the throat wound as one of entrance. It is difficult to believe that Dr. Perry was misquoted on Friday when he repeated the same thing on Saturday. For example, we're told in the footnote, Dallas News reporter John Getty reported that in November 23 interview, so the day after, Dr. Perry said, in the lower portion of Kennedy's neck, right in front, there was a small puncture. Finally, the opinion attributed to Dr. Perry agreed with what was expressed by others who had seen the wound. Dr. Charles Carrico was the first doctor to see the president, and before Perry arrived, had instituted an emergency resuscitative measure. A tube known as an endotracheal tube was inserted into the president's mouth and down his throat. So he saw the wound. At 4:20, 70 minutes after UPI sent its teletype report of Dr. Perry's press conference, Dr. Carrico drafted his medical report. He also described the throat wound as one of entrance, using this phrase: a small penetrating wound of anterior neck in lower 1/3. Assisting Dr. Carrico was emergency room nurse Margaret Hinchliff. In a Warren Commission deposition, she testified, "It was just a little hole in the middle of his neck, about as big around as the end of my little finger, that looked like an entrance bullet hole." When asked by Spector if it could have been an exit bullet hole, Nurse Hinchliff insisted that she had never seen an exit bullet hole that looked like that. It was just a small wound and wasn't jagged like most of the exit bullet wounds that I have seen. Again, this is speaking to the frequency of bullet sightings there in that ER. We're going to look at the footnotes here on this one. It says, immediately following this exchange, Attorney Spector began a series of questions designed to establish that Nurse Hinchliff did not have qualifications to render such an opinion. What experience have you had in observing bullet holes, Miss Hinchliff? Have you ever had any formal studies of bullet holes? This is the way that they did with Lee Bowers. Are you an expert in guns, sir? Are you an expert in weaponry? And he said, no, I had to admit that I'm not. Like, I can give you my genuine opinion, but if I have to be an expert in everything that I speak about, then yeah, I can't do that for you. Nurse Hinchliff answered that her experience was limited to 5 years in the emergency room at Parkland Memorial Hospital. Now, we know that no one person could have been present for all 5,000 bullet wounds that would have happened in those 5 years. But we have to imagine that a normal, regular nurse working in that ER for 5 years would have seen a great many bullet wounds. Hundreds, up to 1,000 perhaps, by her own eyes. How many bullet wounds have you seen? I've seen 0. I would have no useful opinion here. But she had valuable opinion, whether or not she attended a class called A Formal Study of Bullet Holes, right? And more generally, she had 12 years as a registered nurse. Quote, we take care of a lot of bullet wounds down there. I don't know how many a year, she testified. Her opinion was echoed by Dr. Robert McClellan, who arrived too late to see the wound in its pristine condition. He told Richard Dudman of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, we are familiar with bullet wounds. We see them every day, sometimes several a day. This did appear to be an entrance wound. So this whole idea of having to take a course on a formal study of bullet holes is absurd when you are working at a hospital that sees, let's say 1 to 5 on average a day. Those nurses are seeing bullet wounds. They're going and they're staunching the bleeding. They're holding it while the doctor does their procedure. They're on the scene assisting. They see bullet wounds. They know what they're looking at. Far more than Alan Spector would. Another factor reinforcing my conviction that Dr. Perry had not been misquoted was his reaction to the news that all the shots were fired from a building located behind the motorcade. Faced with that fact, Dr. Perry did not change his opinion about the wound. On the contrary, he simply assumed that President Kennedy was turned toward the rear when the bullet struck. Thus, on Saturday, November 23rd, he told the Boston Globe's medical editor, Herbert Black, it may have been that the president was looking up or sideways with his head thrown back when the bullet or bullets struck him. Remember, nobody had seen the film. Nobody had seen even the Life magazine slides at this point. And he says, okay, all the bullets are found back there, then he must have been turned. Perhaps he was waving. But what he's saying is that was an entrance wound. He's saying maybe he was turned and that's why that's an entrance wound. Like, he didn't change his opinion. I was impressed by that statement, made one day after the assassination, which represented Perry's personal effort to reconcile the conflict. By suggesting a posture for the president that would permit a gunman firing from the rear to inflict an entrance wound in the throat, I thought Dr. Perry demonstrated the firmness of his opinion. Yes, indeed. I didn't realize he had done that, but it does show that Dr. Perry feels completely certain that this was an entry wound, so he's trying to come up with a way that the evidence could support that. Like, oh, okay, well, If all the bullets were fired from back there, then he must have turned to look at the crowd or something. There must be something that could explain how an entrance wound could come from there. And so what he pictured was, well, perhaps the president's body was situated to where that was possible. I used to speculate about the sense of bewilderment these men must have experienced later, looking at those pictures published in the newspaper, Life and Time, and seeing for themselves that the president was, in fact, facing forward throughout the entire shooting. Each of them had come to terms with himself on this point, and presumably they all rejected any sinister implications. This meant accepting the fact that the wound in the front of the throat was one of exit, though surely the strangest looking exit wound they had ever seen, one which looked just like an entrance wound. It also meant they had to bear the responsibility for speaking out of turn, for confusing the public record, in a case of monumental historic importance. Yet the doctors at Parkland only described what they saw. It was the wound itself that prompted their reaction. That wound was very small, no more than a 1/4 inch in diameter, described by Dr. Perry as spherical, rather clean cut, and by Dr. Carrico as, quote, an even, round wound. In his Warren Commission deposition, Dr. Ronald Jones summed it up in one brief sentence. The hole was very small and relatively clean cut, as you would see in a bullet that is entering rather than exiting from a patient. Conceding that he had not seen the wound before Dr. Perry made his incision, Dr. Robert McClellan, an assistant professor of surgery in a hospital that sees 1,000 bullet holes a year. He nevertheless testified, if I saw the wound in its state in which Dr. Perry described it to me, I would probably initially think this were an entrance wound. Here, then, was the most persuasive reason for believing that Dr. Perry was not misquoted at his initial press conference. Whether it was one or not, the hole in Kennedy's throat looked like an entrance wound. Nevertheless, by the time Dr. Perry testified before the Warren Commission, his attitude had changed markedly. Although he was still describing the throat wound, anatomically, as a small pencil-size hole, just a 1/4 inch in diameter, Perry no longer maintained it was a wound of entry. It could have been either, he said, and he apparently subscribed to the theory that he had been misquoted at the news conference. It was bedlam, he said. This is the quote, and it's very interesting because it doesn't actually have anything to do with the wound itself. It's describing the room. There were microphones and cameras, and during the course of it, a lot of these hypothetical situations and questions would often be asked by someone on this side and recorded by someone on that. There were tape recorders there and television cameras with their microphones. I don't know. A considerable number of questions were not answered in their entirety, and some that were answered, I'm sure, were misunderstood. So this is someone walking back. Perhaps he had been threatened. Perhaps he had been badgered with questions like what Spector did to other people. He didn't only do this to the nurse. Spector did this to Jean Hill. Others did this to Lee Bowers. So this was their MO with the Warren Report, to take a witness and then be like, well, you don't really have expertise to talk about that, do you? Well, you can't really say that with certainty, can you? Have you taken any formal courses in that? Are you an expert in ballistics, sir? Like, just badgering until the person goes, yeah, I mean, I only know what I know, right? The notion that the problem with the neck wound was Dr. Perry's fault, that it was a simple misquote, was fostered by former CIA chief Alan Dulles. During Dr. Perry's appearance, Dulles bemoaned the, quote, false rumors that have been spread on the basis of these appearances before television, radio, and so forth and so on. So Dulles was from an era, let's go back. 1960 was the first televised presidential debate. So he came from an era where you could control everything through print media. And there was not instantaneous viewing of any facts. So you could craft any story you like. You could manipulate the data very quickly if what you're relying on is print media. And this is him still, I think. My perception is that this is him kind of bemoaning the change in the world, that you can't just put out a few stories. And frankly, his own comments about the Warren Commission that, a few dusty professors will read this thing, but most people won't read the 26 volumes, was his understanding of print media. He knew people will read a story. People will read the New York Times front page story. They're not going to sit and read 26 volumes. And that was during the time of a reading people. They were very, very much heavier readers and more intellectual readers than we are today. But he did not like this whole idea of radio and television. Like a man scolding a small child, he even seemed to suggest that Dr. Perry might wish to clean up the mess he had made. Dulles suggested that all the news clippings could be collected, quote, and possibly, if you are willing, sir, you could send us a letter. Send to the commission a letter pointing out the various points in these press conferences where you are inaccurately quoted. So this is a man, like I was just saying, who is used to manipulating print media. What Dulles apparently had in mind would have been a major project for Perry. He suggested that each clipping should be dealt with separately. Obviously, if you have answered one point in one clipping, it won't be necessary to answer that point if it is repeated in another clipping. So he's picturing poor Dr. Perry, who is a physician. He's seeing patients day in, day out. He's like, well, you could collect all the clippings and make a correction to the record. Yes, sir, answered an apparently chastised Perry. I can and will do this. The footnote just says, this, of course, was never done. But what Dr. Perry told reporters, which, as Dulles knew, was of great legal significance, should have been a matter of simple, determinable fact. If so many reporters with tape recorders were there, weren't his words preserved on magnetic tape? Couldn't they be retrieved, transcribed, studied? Here again, the 26 volumes present a strange appearance. Numerous transcripts of news conferences held at police quarters were published, made from audio and videotapes obtained from the three major networks and their Dallas affiliates. But Dr. Perry's news conference was not among them. During the Warren Commission investigation, Arlen Specter requested the Secret Service to obtain videotapes and transcripts of the Parkland press conference. Secret Service Chief James Rowley reported back after reviewing the material that all the Dallas radio and television stations, as well as the records of NBC, ABC, and CBS in New York City, no videotape or transcript could be found of a television interview with Dr. Malcolm Perry. Yeah, reportedly these were all done away with. Did you know that? But a transcript did exist. A special transcript had been made. A White House transcript, the same kind that was made of every presidential news briefing or news conference. This was done because the Dallas Doctors Press Conference was organized by the White House press staff, who were with the president in Dallas and stayed at Parkland afterward. I knew nothing about this transcript when I wrote my first article. He tracks it down, finds the transcript, and he says, I felt I was returning to Parkland Memorial Hospital on November 22nd, 1963, to a large classroom where the news conference was held shortly after 3 p.m., about an hour after Kennedy's body left the hospital in a coffin. White House staff member Wayne Hawks called the meeting to order. Let me have your attention, please. You wanted to talk to some of the attending physicians. I have two of them here. Dr. Malcolm Perry, an attending physician here at Parkland Memorial Hospital. He will talk to you first. And then Dr. Kemp Clark, the chief neurosurgeon here at the hospital. He will tell you what he knows about it. Dr. Perry? Dr. Perry said he saw two wounds, one in the neck, the other in the head. The neck wound, said Dr. Perry, was a bullet hole, almost in the midline, in the lower portion of the neck, in front, below the Adam's apple. Dr. Clark said the head wound was at the back of his head, principally on the right side, toward the right side. These are all quotes. Dr. Perry was asked whether these two wounds could be caused by one bullet, or did two wounds mean two separate shots. He replied, that would be conjecture on my part. There are two wounds, one of the neck and one of the head. Whether they are directly related or related to two bullets, I cannot say. That's a very careful telling. Very important that he was being that discreet and cautious even at the moment. Question, where was the entrance wound, Dr. Perry? There was an entrance wound in the neck. Next question, which way was the bullet coming on the neck wound? At him? Dr. Perry, it appeared to be coming at him. The reporters kept firing questions. One asked, can't we clear this up just a little bit more? In your estimation, was there one or two shots? Just give us something. Dr. Perry said he couldn't tell. The head and neck wounds might be separate, or they might be caused by one bullet. A reporter asked, Doctor, describe the entrance wound. You think from the front, in the throat? Replied Perry, the wound appeared to be an entrance wound in the front of the throat. Yes, That is correct. If I had had transcript 1327C in 1966, it could have been a major news story, but I didn't. And neither did the commission, because the Secret Service claimed it could locate no tape or transcript of the Parkland Memorial Hospital conference. That press conference faded from the record. From the standpoint of available evidence, what Dr. Perry had said was arguable. It was Dr. Perry's assertion that he had merely answered some hypothetical questions. The Warren report dealt with this situation in a peculiar fashion. Of all of the media reports available, it cited only one, that of the New York Herald Tribune, dated November 23rd, 1963, so the day after, a report that indicated Dr. Perry had stated merely that it was possible that the throat wound was one of entrance. Thus, the Warren Commission trivialized this conflict by quoting one of the few versions of the Parkland press conference that reported it incorrectly. So very interesting. I appreciate David Lifton, his telling of both of these points of fact. I loved getting the look at a close-up conversation with Alan Dulles. That was very fascinating to me. And our look at Malcolm Perry and the questions regarding the entrance wound. I want to hear from you in the comments. What did you notice? The reason I wanted to do this reading was, of course, because it's, a classic book from David Lifton, Best Evidence. But I also wanted to get us into the mindset of now we're going to be looking at post-assassination, and we're going to do it from a variety of angles. We will do it sometimes from real-time or very early writings, and sometimes we are going to be looking at books like this, published in 2013. It is an absolutely thorough look at the JFK assassination with over 1,000 photographs from Robert Groden. And so sometimes we're going to be looking at it from the perspective of early researchers, sometimes through a thorough look. But what we are going to do is keep looking back at the assassination while we continue to advance through the story. So right now we're going to look at bullets and wounds. We're going to start looking at evidence gathering, and we are going to work our way towards the Warren Commission and beyond. That is where we are headed now. So let me know in the comments what you noticed about this reading. What did you notice about David Lifton's writing style? About the conversation with Alan Dulles, about the evidence surrounding Dr. Malcolm Perry's observations of an entrance wound. And let me know what you think about, was this an entrance wound? Were the two wounds related? Tell me your thoughts. Also, isn't that beautiful? That's all I have to say is just that Mary Ann Moorman photo. I actually have it out on our mantle right now, but I wanted to share it with all of you since it was mentioned and since it seemed timely. We will have a Mary Ann Moorman episode coming up. I did get to interview her, so be looking for that, along with other things coming down the pike. But we'll see you soon. I hope you have a great day. Bye.